those numbers proving that this impeachment and the truth that is coming with it, these proceedings, are hurting the president. Now we have direct evidence of how it's hurting him in head-to-head matchups where Democrats appear to be just breezing past Donald Trump now. Joe Biden ahead 53 to 44%. Michael Bloomberg.
Wow.
Little Mike? No. When it comes to numbers against you, Donald, he's big, bad Mike at 52%
got a lot of money.
to 43%. Bernie Sanders, 52% to 45%, a guy that Trump calls a socialist. Person he calls Pocahontas and mocks and ridicules all the time, ahead of him by 5 percentage points. Mayor Pete's up by 4 percentage points, and Amy Klobuchar up by 3 percentage points. These numbers had tightened up, Willie, before impeachment. And again, I hear Trumpists on TV. I read Trumpists in the papers and on Twitter. They're all whistling past the graveyard, suggesting that this impeachment proceeding could not be going better for Donald Trump, and yet the American people in poll after poll suggest just the opposite is true. This is bad news for Donald Trump.
If you look at almost any poll in these head-to-head matchups, or when people talk about the Democratic race to become the nominee, the key element of their vote is who can beat Donald Trump. Yes, they'd like to have somebody who aligns perfectly with their worldview and their view on certain issues, but they want to win. Democrats want to win. And so when you look at that graphic, if we put it up again, you can see that all the way down the line, there are 5, 6 candidates who can make the electability argument. If the question was, well, some people say, without evidence really, oh, Elizabeth Warren couldn't beat him head to head. She can make that case, John Lemire, that she can win. Pete Buttigieg can make that case. Amy Klobuchar, and certainly Joe Biden and Michael Bloomberg can make that case. Democrats want to win, and it's in the crosstabs of this poll again more than anything. And now you've got a list of people led by Joe Biden and Michael Bloomberg who can make the case. Again, this is not a national referendum, the general election. We know that. But who can make the case that I would beat this president.
Right. Applying the usual caveats about national polls, these are impressive numbers for Democrats. And it also shows where the country is on impeachment. That this is something, a process they want to play out. And we've seen the numbers be pretty consistent about this. That the President Trump's base, his loyal 40-odd% of supporters, they don't want this to happen. They feel like it's a sham. They feel like the Republicans are doing the right thing by trying to bring it to a quick end. But most of the American people, the majority of the American people, want to see it play out. And as much as the Trump campaign makes an argument that this is going to be good for them and excite their base, and only time will tell if that's true, the numbers right now, the consistent public polling suggests that's not the case. Now, CNN also had a poll yesterday just on the battleground states with these candidates, and the margins were closer, certainly. And that is where this election is going to be decided. But this goes to show you that as much as we know what we think we know, what will be the eventual outcome of this trial in terms of whether the president's going to be removed from office, the political ramifications are yet to be determined. And there is a chance, even if in a week or so he's acquitted, this will have long-lasting damage.
And at the very least, Joe, these polls show that 70%, 65% of Americans, which with those numbers brings in some Republicans and a lot of independents, want to see a fair trial. So when the president of the United States goes out, as you just showed in that clip, and says, we got a bunch of documents that we haven't given them, saying explicitly we're withholding evidence, that 65 to 70% says, wait a minute, that's not a fair trial.
Yeah, and Americans want a fair trial. They want impartial jurors. And they want relevant witnesses. And Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham and the Republican Party have bragged openly that they were not going to provide a fair trial to the American people. They weren't going to be honest brokers. They weren't going to be impartial jurors, even though they raised their hand and swore a solemn oath that they would be. And it is costing Donald Trump and the Republican Party right now. Really quickly, before we get on to impeachment, just an interesting Monmouth poll came out yesterday in the Democratic field nationwide. And what it shows is, of course, Joe Biden up, doing pretty well. He and Sanders seem to be at the top of all of these polls right now. Elizabeth Warren at 14%. But look at this. Michael Bloomberg up 4 more percentage points from December. He's at 9%, 3 percentage points ahead Pete Buttigieg nationally, and 4 percentage points ahead of Amy Klobuchar nationally. He is about to hit double digits, and I'm sorry, but this seems pretty familiar, Willie, from what people were saying about another New York millionaire or billionaire, whatever Donald Trump is, back in the early stages of his campaign. Mike Bloomberg, not going to get past 3%, not going to get past 4%. Looks like he's about to get into double digits.
Yeah, he doesn't have the celebrity that Donald Trump had in 2016, and you could argue that the field is much more formidable than the one that Donald Trump faced in 2016. But it's amazing what $250 million already in advertising in states across the country, big states like California and New York, Super Tuesday states. Obviously, he's not playing at the beginning, but he's laying the groundwork to be sitting pretty well, especially if the vote is fractured. Right. If one person wins Iowa, another wins New Hampshire, another wins South Carolina, he could be sitting there to make the case, say the Democratic Party hasn't made up its mind. Here I am. I'm a guy who's competent, who ran the biggest city in the country, who can beat Donald Trump.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.